Rethinking the West, Jeffrey Sachs and the Case for the North Atlantic. Abstract. The term the West is pervasive in geopolitical discourse, but is often applied imprecisely. Economist and development expert Jeffrey D. Sachs has argued that this terminology fails to capture the historical and institutional reality of the global order. This paper explores Sachs's critique, evaluating his proposition that the North Atlantic provides a more accurate framework for analyzing power structures in the post-World War II world. By shifting away from culturally loaded terminology, Sachs contributes to a more historically grounded understanding of global governance. Introduction. Jeffrey D. Sachs is a prominent economist, professor of sustainable development, and former advisor to multiple United Nations Secretaries General. His work spans macroeconomic stabilization, global health, and sustainable development, but he has also contributed significantly to debates surrounding global governance and the structure of international power. In recent years, Sachs has called into question the continued utility of the term the West as a descriptor for the dominant bloc in international affairs, proposing instead the more precise and historically valid term, the North Atlantic. The problematic legacy of the West. The term the West originated as a Cold War category, denoting countries aligned with liberal capitalist democracies in opposition to the Soviet bloc. Over time, its usage has expanded to imply a coherent cultural, ideological, and civilizational identity, typically encompassing Europe, North America, and strategic allies such as Japan and Australia. However, Sachs argues that this homogenization is both analytically misleading and politically problematic. The inclusion of East Asian states such as Japan and South Korea under this banner obscures their distinct historical trajectories, civilizational legacies, and the contingent nature of their geopolitical alliances. Sachs. Furthermore, the West often functions as a euphemism for the United States and its European allies, imbuing their political and economic models with a universal authority they neither possess nor merit. In Sachs's view, this discursive habit reinforces Eurocentric assumptions and masks the actual geography and institutional origins of the international order. The case for the North Atlantic. Sachs proposes that the North Atlantic is a more historically and geographically accurate term for the bloc that has shaped the global system since the mid-20th century. The institutions that continue to define global governance, the International Monetary Fund, World Bank, NATO, the G7, are largely products of cooperation between the United States and Western Europe. These states share not only transatlantic geography, but also a common historical experience of industrial capitalism, colonial expansion, and post-war reconstruction. Unlike the West, which implies cultural and ideological unity, the North Atlantic refers specifically to a set of nations bound by institutional collaboration and shared responsibility for the structure of the contemporary global economy and security architecture. It is not a civilizational category, but a historically contingent alignment grounded in specific power relations. Power, language, and historical responsibility. Sachs's intervention is fundamentally about the politics of language. He argues that geopolitical analysis requires a vocabulary rooted in history, not ideology. By describing the global order in terms of the West, scholars and policymakers perpetuate a myth of cultural unity that legitimizes certain nations' dominance while marginalizing others. This framing also deflects responsibility by making power diffuse and collective, rather than situated and accountable. Using the North Atlantic instead draws attention to the actors most responsible for shaping post-war institutions and decisions. It also enables a more inclusive understanding of global affairs, and one that recognizes the rising influence of actors outside this bloc, including China, India, Brazil, and others, without forcing them into an outdated East-West binary. Conclusion. In a world increasingly defined by multipolarity and institutional transformation, the continued use of the term the West obscures more than it clarifies. Jeffrey Sachs's call to replace it with the North Atlantic is not a matter of stylistic preference, but of analytical precision and historical accountability. Such a shift in terminology is vital for developing a more accurate and equitable framework for understanding contemporary global politics. Sachs's proposal invites not only a reconsideration of inherited geopolitical language, but a broader decolonization of international relations theory. Recognizing the North Atlantic as a historically situated bloc rather than a civilizational norm is a step toward a more pluralistic and responsible discourse on global governance. Sachs, J.D., 2022. The Ages of Globalization, Geography, Technology, and Institutions. Columbia University Press.
Don't forget to hit that subscribe button to show your support.